A bullied teen helped an elderly man cross the street, never knowing he was a disguised king. That's what they would say later, in whispers that rippled through the small town of Oak Ridge, like autumn leaves skittering across pavement. But on that gray November afternoon, Alex Parker was just trying to survive another day. The 16-year-old hunched his shoulders against the bitter wind, his too thin jacket offering little protection as he hurried away from the high school. Another day, another series of small humiliations. The snickers when he'd answered incorrectly in calculus. The lunch tray knocked deliberately from his hands. The shoulder checks in the hallway that sent him stumbling into lockers. Little paper cuts to his dignity that, over time, had left him bleeding inside. Alex kept his head down, auburn hair falling over eyes that rarely met anyone else's anymore. Once he'd been different, quick to smile, eager to raise his hand in class. That was before his father's death 2 years ago, before the move to this town where he'd never quite belonged, before his mother had taken on 3 jobs just to keep them afloat, leaving Alex alone with the hollow echo of an empty apartment most evenings. The crosswalk signal blinked its mechanical invitation, but Alex hesitated at the curb. Across the street, he spotted them. Jason Mercer and his friends, the self-proclaimed kings of Oak Ridge High. Alex's stomach clenched. Maybe if he waited, they'd move on. "Excuse me, young man." The voice came from beside him, thin but carrying a certain warmth that seemed at odds with the gray day. Alex turned to find an elderly man standing at his elbow. He was small in stature, slightly stooped, with a cane clutched in one gnarled hand. His coat looked expensive once, but now hung somewhat threadbare on his frame. Yet there was something in the old man's eyes, a sharp intelligence, a quiet dignity, that made Alex straighten slightly. "Would you be so kind as to help me across? These old legs don't move as quickly as they once did, and drivers these days," he gestured vaguely with his free hand, "they wait for no one." Alex glanced again at Jason and his friends, then back at the old man whose eyes crinkled at the corners, patient and somehow knowing. The signal was changing, counting down. "Sure," Alex said, his voice rusty from disuse. He offered his arm, feeling the surprising strength in the old man's grip as they stepped off the curb together. Halfway across, the man stumbled slightly, and Alex instinctively tightened his hold, steadying him. "Thank you," the man murmured. "What's your name, young man?" "Alex. Alex Parker." "A fine name. You may call me Thomas." Alex nodded, hyper-aware of Jason watching from the corner, the smirk already forming on his face. "Great. More ammunition for tomorrow." But the old man, Thomas, seemed oblivious to Alex's discomfort, patting his arm gently as they reached the opposite curb. "Would you mind walking with me a bit further? There's a small cafe just down the block. I'd be pleased to buy you a hot chocolate as thanks." Alex should have said no. He had homework waiting. His mother would worry if he was late. But something in the man's expression, hopeful, kind, yet somehow lonely, resonated with something broken inside Alex's chest. "Okay," he found himself saying, "just for a little while." The cafe was warm and smelled of cinnamon and coffee, a welcome relief from the November chill. They settled at a corner table, Alex awkwardly removing his backpack while Thomas ordered for them both. Hot chocolate with extra whipped cream and 2 slices of apple pie. "My treat," Thomas insisted when Alex began to protest. "It's not often I have the pleasure of company these days." When their order arrived, Alex wrapped his cold fingers around the warm mug, inhaling the rich chocolate scent. Thomas watched him with a small smile that seemed to hold secrets. "You don't talk much, do I frighten you?" Thomas asked, his tone gentle, teasing. Alex shook his head. "No, sir. I'm just not used to people wanting to talk to me." Thomas tilted his head. "And why is that?" Alex stared into his mug. "I'm not exactly popular." "Ah," Thomas nodded slowly. "Those young men at the corner. I noticed them watching you." Alex's cheeks burned. Was it that obvious? People can be cruel when they don't understand something or someone different. Thomas continued, his voice suddenly distant, as if speaking from experience. "But difference, Alex, is what makes the world interesting. Imagine if every tree in the forest grew exactly the same way." For the next hour they talked, or rather, Thomas talked, and Alex gradually found himself responding in more than monosyllables. Thomas asked about school, about Alex's interests, astronomy and old sci-fi movies, about the book peeking from his backpack, never about family or friends, as if sensing the tender spots Alex couldn't bear to have touched. In return, Thomas shared stories of distant countries he'd visited, of mountains so tall they seemed to touch the stars, of deserts where the silence was so complete you could hear your own heartbeat. He spoke of these places with such vivid detail that Alex could almost see them, taste the spices in Marrakech markets, feel the Mediterranean sun on his face. As the cafe lights glowed warmer against the darkening windows, Alex realized with a start that it was growing late. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "My mom will be wondering." Thomas nodded, settling their bill with cash from an old leather wallet. "May I ask a favor, Alex?" "Sure. This was the most pleasant afternoon I've had in some time. Would you consider meeting me here again? Perhaps Thursday after your school?" Alex hesitated only briefly. "Okay." Thursday. Outside, the streetlights had come on, casting pools of golden light on the sidewalk. Alex expected to part ways, but Thomas fell into step beside him. "I live just a few blocks from here," the old man explained. "If it's not too much trouble." "It's no trouble," Alex said and meant it. They walked in comfortable silence, their breath clouding in the cold air. At the corner of Maple and Pine, Thomas stopped before a modest brownstone. "This is me," he said, then paused, studying Alex's face. "Thank you, not just for the assistance, but for the conversation. Both are rarer gifts than you might imagine." Alex shuffled his feet, unused to gratitude. "It was nothing." "No," Thomas said firmly. "Kindness is never nothing." As Alex turned to leave, Thomas called after him. "Alex, that scarf of yours is coming undone." Alex reached up, surprised to find his old blue scarf loose around his neck. As he rewound it, Thomas nodded approvingly. "Royal blue, a good color for you, the color of loyalty and truth." With a final wave, the old man disappeared into the building. Walking home in the gathering darkness, Alex felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. A warmth that had nothing to do with his scarf or the hot chocolate. For the first time in months, he'd been seen. Not as the awkward new kid, not as a target, but as a person worth talking to. It was such a small thing, and yet it wasn't small at all. Thursday couldn't come fast enough. The days between dragged, punctuated by the usual torments. Jason knocked Alex's books from his hands in the hallway, sneering. "Got a new boyfriend, Parker? Saw you with that old geezer. What, you can't make friends your own age?" Alex said nothing, just gathered his scattered papers, cheeks burning. But this time, something was different. The words still stung, but they didn't cut as deeply. He had something to look forward to, a secret anticipation that Jason couldn't touch. Thursday afternoon found Alex rushing to the cafe, arriving breathless just as Thomas was settling at their corner table. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Thomas admitted, his eyes crinkling with pleasure. "I said I would," Alex replied, sliding into his seat. Over the next several weeks, a pattern formed. Twice a week, they would meet at the cafe. Thomas always ordered the same thing, hot chocolate and apple pie for both of them, and they would talk for hours. Sometimes about books or history or the stars. Sometimes Thomas would share more of his remarkable stories. Occasionally, hesitantly, Alex would share fragments of his own life. His father's love of stargazing, his mother's exhaustion, his own isolation. Thomas never offered pity, only understanding, and sometimes gently perspective. "The ones who hurt you," he said once, after Alex had reluctantly described a particularly humiliating incident in gym class. "They're fighting their own battles we know nothing about. So that makes it okay?" Alex asked, unable to keep the bitterness from his voice. "No," Thomas said firmly. "But understanding that doesn't make you weak. It makes you wiser than they are." December arrived with swirling snow and holiday decorations, transforming the cafe into a wonderland of twinkling lights. Alex noticed that Thomas seemed more frail, his cough more persistent. "It's nothing," Thomas insisted when Alex expressed concern. "Winter always reminds these old bones of their age," but Alex wasn't convinced. One afternoon, he arrived to find Thomas's usual spot empty. He waited an hour, anxiety growing with each passing minute. Finally, he approached the counter. "The old gentleman I usually meet. Have you seen him today?" The barista, who'd grown used to their regular visits, shook her head. "No, not today. He's never missed before, has he?" Heart pounding, Alex left the cafe and headed for the brownstone on Maple and Pine. He'd never gone there without Thomas, had never been inside, but worry propelled him forward through the gently falling snow. The building had a security entrance. Alex hesitated, then pressed the button for apartment 3B, the number he'd glimpsed once on Thomas's mail. No answer. He was about to leave when the door opened, and a well-dressed woman in her 50s emerged. "Excuse me," Alex said quickly. "I'm looking for Thomas. Elderly gentleman, apartment 3B. We meet at the cafe, but he wasn't there today, and I'm worried." The woman's expression shifted from suspicion to concern. "You must be Alex. He's mentioned you." She held the door open. "Come in. He's been ill for a few days. The doctor says it's just a severe cold, but at his age..." The apartment was modest but tastefully furnished, with bookshelves lining every wall. Thomas lay on a sofa near a window that overlooked a small park, covered with a quilt despite the warmth of the room. His eyes brightened when he saw Alex. "My boy!" What a surprise. "You weren't at the cafe," Alex said simply. Thomas's caretaker, a niece, she explained, left them alone after bringing tea. "I'm sorry to have worried you," Thomas said, his voice weaker than Alex had ever heard it. "This old body sometimes betrays me. You should have told me you were sick." "I could have," Alex gestured vaguely, realizing there was little he could have done. "Come sit." Thomas patted the edge of the sofa. "Tell me about your week." And so Alex did, filling the quiet apartment with stories of small victories. A good grade on his physics test, a teacher who'd praised his essay, a rare evening when his mother had been home for dinner. He didn't mention the continuing harassment, but Thomas seemed to sense the omissions. "And the others?" "Your classmates?" Alex shrugged. "Same as always." Thomas studied him. "Yet something's changed. You stand straighter now." It was true, Alex realized. Something had shifted in him over these weeks. He still didn't have friends at school, still faced daily torments, but they seemed to touch him less deeply, as if he now carried something inside that couldn't be taken away. "It helps," Alex admitted, "knowing I have somewhere else to be." "Someone who..." He stopped, embarrassed. "Someone who sees you," Thomas finished softly. Alex nodded, throat tight. As the winter deepened, their routine adjusted. On days when Thomas felt strong enough, they met at the cafe. When he couldn't leave his apartment, Alex would visit him there, often bringing homework to complete while Thomas napped. Sometimes they would play chess, Thomas teaching Alex the finer points of strategy. "Life is like this game," Thomas mused once, moving his knight. "The strongest pieces aren't always the most valuable. Sometimes it's the quiet ones, moving in unexpected ways that change everything." During these visits, Alex began to notice curious details. The books on Thomas's shelves weren't ordinary. Many were leather-bound first editions in multiple languages. Occasionally, important-looking people would visit, speaking to Thomas in hushed, deferential tones. Once Alex arrived to find a distinguished man in a tailored suit leaving, who bowed slightly to Thomas before departing. "An old colleague," Thomas explained vaguely. Then there was the medallion Alex sometimes glimpsed when Thomas's robe gaped open, gold with an intricate crest he didn't recognize. And the phone calls Thomas would take in a language Alex couldn't identify, his voice suddenly stronger, more commanding. Curiosity burned, but Alex never asked. Whatever secrets Thomas kept felt unimportant next to the friendship they'd built. January brought the worst blizzard in decades. School closed for 3 days as the town disappeared under nearly 2 feet of snow. Alex fretted about Thomas, trudging through unplowed streets to check on him. He found the old man sitting by the window, watching the snow with a wistful expression. "It reminds me of home," Thomas said, not turning around. "The mountains in winter, so white they hurt your eyes to look at them." "Where is home?" Alex asked, realizing he'd never thought to ask before. Thomas smiled mysteriously. "A small country. You wouldn't have heard of it." That evening, as Alex prepared to leave, Thomas held out a small package wrapped in simple brown paper. "Your birthday is tomorrow, is it not?" Alex blinked in surprise. He'd mentioned it once, weeks ago, never expecting Thomas to remember. "It's nothing elaborate," Thomas continued, "but I thought you might like it." At home, Alex carefully unwrapped the gift. Inside lay a book, an illustrated atlas. But unlike any he'd seen before, the pages were filled with detailed maps of countries he recognized, and some he didn't, each accompanied by handwritten notes in elegant script. In the section on a tiny European country called Aldovia, he found a photograph of a mountain range that took his breath away. Peaks so majestic they seemed to pierce the heavens themselves. On the inside cover, Thomas had written, "To Alex, who helped an old man cross a street and never suspected he was crossing into a new life himself. The world is wider than your current view of it. Look up always." When Alex returned to school, something had shifted. Perhaps it was the confidence that came from having a friend, even an elderly one. Or perhaps it was the quiet strength he'd absorbed from Thomas's stories. Whatever the cause, when Jason shoved him against the lockers and sneered, "How's your boyfriend, freak?" Alex didn't cower. Instead, he looked Jason directly in the eyes and said calmly, "His name is Thomas, and he's taught me more about being a man than you'll ever know." The surprise on Jason's face was almost comical. For a moment, Alex thought he might get punched. Instead, something like confusion flickered across Jason's features before he stormed away. That afternoon, Alex recounted the incident to Thomas, who listened with a proud smile. Courage, Thomas said, is not the absence of fear, but the triumph over it. Nelson Mandela. Alex identified the quote with a grin. Thomas's eyes twinkled. You've been reading those books I recommended. As February melted into March, Alex noticed Thomas growing frailer. His cough worsened, and some days he seemed to struggle for breath. Alex's worry grew, especially when he arrived one day to find a doctor leaving the apartment. Just a checkup, Thomas insisted, but the medication lined up on his bedside table told a different story. One afternoon in late March, Alex arrived to find Thomas dressed in a suit, sitting in an armchair that somehow resembled a throne the way he occupied it. Alex, he said, his voice stronger than it had been in weeks. Sit with me. There's something I must tell you. Heart pounding, Alex perched on the edge of the sofa. I haven't been entirely truthful with you, Thomas began. My name is not simply Thomas. It is Thomas Aldrich Wilhelm Frederick, and was the king of Aldovia. Alex stared, certain this was some kind of joke. But Thomas's expression remained serious. 6 months ago, I abdicated in favor of my son. My health was failing, and he was ready. I chose to spend my remaining time away from court, somewhere I could be simply a man rather than a symbol. My security detail is discreet. You've likely noticed them without realizing. Alex's mind raced, cataloging the strange details that suddenly made sense. The visitors, the phone calls, the deference people showed Thomas despite his apparently humble circumstances. Why are you telling me this now? He managed to ask. King Thomas, smiled gently. Because I'm returning home next week. My doctors insist, and I find I miss the mountains. He paused. And because you deserve the truth from someone who has come to care for you a great deal. Alex felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath him. You're leaving? Yes, but not without saying a proper goodbye. Thomas reached for an envelope on the side table. This is for you. Inside, Alex found plane tickets and documents. A summer program at the Royal Aldovian Science Academy, all expenses paid, with a personal invitation from the Crown Prince himself. They have one of the finest astronomy programs in Europe, Thomas explained. 3 months of study that will open doors to universities worldwide. Alex's hands trembled. I can't accept this. It's too much. It is nothing, Thomas countered, compared to what you've given me. A few months of friendship that reminded an old king what truly matters. What did I give you? Alex asked, genuinely confused. I just helped you cross the street. Thomas leaned forward, his eyes intense. You gave me your time when others would not. You saw me as a person, not a burden or a curiosity. You offered kindness without agenda. These are royal gifts, Alex, more precious than gold. The week that followed passed in a blur. Alex helped Thomas prepare for his journey, listening to stories of Aldovia that the old king now shared freely, tales of the palace where he'd grown up, the traditions he'd maintained and those he'd changed, the son who now wore the crown he'd relinquished. On their final evening together, they sat by the window watching the first spring rain. I've been thinking, Thomas said, about that day we met. Why did you help me? You were clearly trying to avoid those boys across the street. Alex considered the question. I don't know. It just seemed like the right thing to do. Thomas nodded. Character is who you are when no one important is watching. Or so you think. His eyes twinkled. Little did you know you were being observed by a king. You weren't a king to me, Alex said honestly. You were just someone who needed help. Precisely, Thomas said softly. And that, my boy, is why you will always be royal in the ways that truly matter. The following morning, Alex helped Thomas to the sleek black car waiting outside the brownstone. A discreet security team materialized, handling luggage and clearing a path. Remember, Thomas said, gripping Alex's hand with surprising strength, you have royal blood in your veins. Alex frowned in confusion. Not by birth, Thomas clarified, but by choice. Every time you choose courage over fear, kindness over cruelty, hope over despair, you claim your heritage as nobility of the highest order. As the car pulled away, Alex stood on the sidewalk, the spring sunshine warm on his face. He felt simultaneously hollow with loss and full to bursting with something he couldn't name. That evening, when his mother returned from work, Alex showed her the program invitation and tickets. Aldovia? She said, bewildered. How did this happen? So Alex told her everything about Thomas, their friendship, the revelation of his identity. As he spoke, he realized how much had changed since that gray November afternoon when he'd helped an old man cross the street. He stood taller now, spoke more confidently. Even at school, things had shifted. Jason's taunts had lost their power, and others had begun to notice Alex, not as a target, but as someone steady, someone who helped Mr. Reed. Griggs carried books to his car, who tutored freshmen in physics, who met an old man at the cafe twice a week without caring what anyone thought. Summer came, and with it, Alex's journey to Aldovia. The palace sent a car to meet him at the airport, a surreal experience for a boy who'd never traveled outside his state before. As they wound through mountain roads more beautiful than any photograph could capture, Alex pressed his face to the window, drinking in the majesty of a world he'd only known through Thomas's stories. The Science Academy exceeded his wildest dreams. State-of-the-art telescopes, professors who spoke of the stars with poetry and precision, students from around the world who shared his passion for the cosmos. For the first time, Alex found himself among peers who valued his intelligence, his curiosity, his perspective. 2 weeks into the program, a royal aide appeared at his dormitory. "His Majesty requests your presence at the palace," she announced, as if this were a perfectly normal occurrence. The palace gleamed white against the mountain backdrop, flags snapping in the alpine breeze. Alex was led through corridors lined with portraits of stern-faced monarchs until he reached a sunlit terrace where a man in his 50s stood gazing at the view. "Your Majesty," the aide murmured, bowing slightly. The man turned, and Alex saw Thomas in his features. The same intelligent eyes, the same quiet dignity. "Alex Parker," the King of Aldovia said warmly. "My father spoke of you often in his final days." The words hit Alex like a physical blow. "Final, the king's expression softened. "He didn't tell you." "My father passed away 3 days after returning home. His last wish was that you would not know until you had experienced Aldovia, as he wanted you to see it. Not shadowed by grief, but illuminated by possibility." Alex's vision blurred with tears he couldn't stop. The king stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on his shoulder. "He wanted you to have this." He held out a small wooden box. Inside lay Thomas's medallion, the royal crest of Aldovia, hanging from a blue ribbon. "This belonged to my great-grandfather," the king explained. "My father wore it every day of his reign. He said you would understand its significance." Alex's fingers traced the intricate design, remembering Thomas's words about the royal blue of his scarf, the color of loyalty and truth. "There is a tradition in our country," the king continued. "When someone saves the life of a royal family member, they become an honorary member of the royal guard. My father insisted that you saved him. Not physically, perhaps, but in ways that mattered more." "He saved me too," Alex whispered. The king nodded. "He said you would say that. The best relationships are those where both parties believe they received the greater gift." That evening, Alex stood on the Academy's observation deck, Thomas's medallion heavy against his chest as he gazed at stars that seemed close enough to touch. He thought about the scared, hunched boy he'd been just months ago, crossing a street with his eyes downcast, afraid of his own shadow. Now he stood straight back beneath an Aldovian sky, carrying the friendship of a king and the knowledge that sometimes the smallest choices, to help, to listen, to simply be kind, could alter the course of lives in ways no one could predict. In his pocket, he felt his phone vibrate, a text from his mother with a screenshot of an email. The message was from Jason Mercer, of all people, asking awkwardly if Alex might be willing to help him with physics when he returned. Apparently, the teacher had suggested Alex as a tutor. Alex smiled, thinking of what Thomas might say about second chances and the courage it takes to ask for help. He tucked the phone away and turned his gaze back to the stars, those ancient lights that had witnessed countless human stories unfold. Some might call what happened a fairy tale. A bullied teen helps an elderly man cross the street, never knowing he was a disguised king. But Alex knew better. The true magic wasn't in Thomas's crown or title. It was in the simple human connection that had transformed them both. The old king who found renewed purpose in mentoring a lonely boy, and the boy who discovered his own worth through the eyes of someone who truly saw him. Royal blood, Thomas had said, not by birth but by choice. As the stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance, Alex made his choice again, to live with the courage, kindness, and dignity worthy of the friendship he'd been given. To live in all the ways that truly mattered, like a king.